All right, the next topic here is one that it really just depends on how far you got last year in the spring as to whether you had this or not. And this is the idea of a limiting problem. Okay, so a limiting problem is going to be different because you're going to end up with two given values. So they're going to give you two numbers, or you're going to start with two values, and that is different than what we've seen. So if we start with two values, meaning they could be grams, liters, molecules, or two amounts, and these amounts are going to be of different chemicals, then there's a good possibility that it is a limiting problem. So if we have starting with two amounts or two numbers, however you want to think about that, then there's a good idea that we're going to have one of these limiting problems. So that is going to be sort of the first clue, is that you start with two numbers. And maybe I'll just kind of clean it up and just say, okay, if I've got two numbers, then that might be a big clue. All right, so it says the reactant that is completely consumed in a chemical reaction limits the amount of products formed, and it is called, and so the first blank is limiting, and the second blank is reactant. Now, also, it could be called a limiting and then a reagent. Both mean the same thing. Okay, so limiting reactant, limiting reagent. So these two numbers are kind of the giveaway that you might need to look for a possibility that's a limiting problem. So in a limiting problem, what do? We're going to solve for mass or moles just like normal, but here's the difference. We're going to do it for each of the reactants. What this means is that you're going to solve the problem twice. So you're going to solve the problem twice, and that's going to be different than what we've been doing. So you're going to solve the problem twice, and you're going to get two answers. So it says in a limiting problem, solve for mass or moles of the product for each of the reactants. And then here we go. Very, very, very important. The smallest, or the small value, is going to be your answer. So let's say you run it through and you get 5 grams, and you run it through and you get 10 grams. Well, your answer is a small one. The answer is going to be the 5. Think about it this way, and I usually do this in class. It's just in the spring we didn't have this. Let's say that you have a recipe and you want to make some cookies, right? So you're like, I want to make some cookies, and what kind of cookies do you want to make? Well, maybe you want to make some chocolate chip cookies, right? So you're going to make some chocolate chip cookies, and what is in your chocolate chip cookies? Well, obviously your chocolate chip cookies are going to have some chocolate chips, right? And then they got some other stuff, right? So they got some flour, and then you got some like sugar, right? So you got some brown sugar, you got some baking soda, whatever. You got all this stuff. But let's say that you have one chocolate chip. You have one chocolate chip. One chocolate chip. How many chocolate chip cookies can you make? Well, I mean, if you can't chop the chocolate chip into a bunch of pieces, we're going to say one chocolate chip is going to limit you to one cookie, right? You might have 50 pounds of flour. You might have 100 pounds of sugar, but you've only got one chocolate chip. I mean, it's pretty sad. I know it's one chocolate chip, but your mom didn't get the chocolate chips. You got one chocolate chip. It was in the bag. So you ate all the rest of them. That's it. So I got one. That means you can make a whopping one cookie. So what is limiting your cookies? Well, your cookies are your product. So what is limiting your cookies is going to be the fact that your chocolate chips are running out. So what we would say in this situation is we would say that the chocolate chips, or chip in this case, are going to be what we would call the limiting item. And so it could be a limiting factor, it could be a limiting reagent, it could be a limiting reactant. And so up here, oops, don't want to do that. The limiting item, limiting reactant, or the limiting reagent, might also want to write in there the limiting factor. All the same thing, they're all limiting. So limiting, they're all going to be the same thing. So like I say, you might want to go back up in there and add the limiting factor. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to the next piece here, and I can show you real quick that we're gonna work this problem, but I'm gonna do it on the next video so I don't run out of time, because these do take a bit of time. But I want to point out right away, if 18.1 grams of ammonia are reacted with 90.40 grams of copper 2 oxide, determine the mass of nitrogen that can be formed. Okay, so look, we have 2 numbers. They are different chemicals, and we're looking for a product. So we have a limiting problem because we have 2 things. One of these chemicals is going to run out. So we're going to either run out of this and stop making nitrogen, or we're going to run out of this and stop making nitrogen. Either way, one of these is going to run out. So one of these is your chocolate chips. One of them is going to run out, meaning you can only make one cookie. The other one's going to be what we call excess, meaning that you got plenty of it. Okay. All right. Pause the video here, and we'll